And they sat me in what is called an Ul Quma simulator, a booth with screens for the inside walls, on which they projected images and videos of Besźel, with the Bez buildings highlighted and their Ul Quma neighbors minimized with lighting and focused. Over long seconds, again and again, they would reverse the visual stress so that for the same vista, Besźel would recede and Ul Quma shine.
We should be so lucky as to take as many things as possible from Roy Orbison.
Yeah,
I think you once
voice.
told me I love this detail about Roy Orbison, that he referred to most other singers as vocal stylists.
Specifically the other traveling Wilburys.
Right, yeah, like Tom Petty.
Right. Yeah, it was something like, they were a super group in the 80s, and some interviewer asked him, like, what's it like being in a band with 5 singers? And he's like, well, there's really only one singer, and the other guys are vocal stylists.
There is a smith in Hillsborough, sort of a world famous, a knife maker.
Oh, okay.
And he sort of,
to be more precise.
A what?
An armorer, to be more precise.
An armorer, yes. And he refers to most other knives as something like cutting implements.
Ah.
And it's very much in the same vein as vocal
sort
stylist.
Of like, there's champagne and then there is sparkling wine. And
exactly, yes. And there's only one actual champagne.
There's only one place you're allowed to call it champagne, but I think there are many. Although maybe Dom Perignon would like to claim that there is only one champagne.
Reading the first half of China Mieville's 2010 novel, The City and the City.
Sure,
and this, I would like to add that it is a motherfucker. This book is amazing.
I love this book. I really love it. I think it was well received, but I think it's a stone cold classic. Like, I think it's up there with like The Left Hand of Darkness in terms of anthropological science fiction, or Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. And I've read some of his other books, but so we're going to do a recap. But this book. One of the joys of this book is there is a really, really fascinating premise. And the premise, you could probably read it on the back of the book, but I would recommend not doing that. The premise is revealed in little drips and dollops, and you have to puzzle it together. So if you haven't read it, but think you might, I strongly suggest you hit pause on this podcast, read the book. Or read the first half of the book and then rejoin us, because the pleasure of kind of figuring out what's going on is really a huge part of the joy of reading it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of knew the premise because I'd gone on a search of like, hey, I want some speculative fiction noir. And this is like the first thing that popped up. And I was like, oh, I've heard great things about him. And I've also heard the title of that book. And I knew I'd seen just enough of the summary to know that it had something to do with basically a city layered on top of another city, but I kind of backed off from there. And so I did get to experience the joy of realizing what's happening. But let's get into our recap.
Yeah. So it starts like many detective noir novels start with a body. Our protagonist, murder inspector Theodore Burlou of the Extreme Crime Squad of the fictional East European city-state Besźel, I think Besźel, is called in to investigate the murder of an unidentified woman, which they call a fulana. That's their version of Jane Doe. And then he's joined by a constable, sort of a lower-ranking beat cop, Elizabeth Corwee. This city has all the same stuff that we have, and it just all has a slightly different name. And a sort of Cold War era name too, which is often pretty fun. So pretty quickly they begin to suspect that. So this woman's been found murdered. Pretty quickly they begin to suspect that the murderer or murderers may have also breached, which means coming into Besźel illegally from another city-state that is adjacent, we understand, to Besźel. It's called Ul Quma, and it's subject to a different set of rules. Well, I should back up. So you're not there are legal ways to go from one of the cities to the other, and there are illegal ways. And the illegal ways are all sort of gathered under the concept of breach. And breach is also, as we understand, kind of like a spook agency that can investigate breaches, but they're very, very secretive and also apparently very, very punitive.
And described as an alien power also.
Right.
And the way that Breach kind of functions is in this like very unknowable, extremely powerful kind of manner of kind of disappearing people or entities wholesale, but not disappearing them in the way that we are familiar with like the Stasi or like South and Central American secret polices, but like literally like taking them away.
We don't know what happens to them.
Yeah, we don't know what happens. And the reason why this book is so like mind-bending is that Besźel and Ul Quma are literally kind of occupying the same literal space. And all of the inhabitants are trained in something called unseeing. And like children below the age of 8 are like really not allowed to like be by themselves because they will just start noticing the other city. And very early on, one of our first clues is our main character Theodore sort of notices an older woman who is Ilkomen, and she's walking on the same street as he is, and both of them like instantly, like unsee each other. And the way that you like very often Ilkomen buildings or Ilkomen streets will share the same street as Besźel, and it's called crosshatching when that's the case. But you're supposed to ignore the other country that is there in the same physical space as you. It is an astonishing act of imagination.
It is, and then maybe it's not. I want to raise. The victim is ID'd as Mahalia Geary, and this is actually due to an act of breach, where Theodore Barlou gets a tip from somebody in Ul Quma who has seen a missing person sign, which he should not have seen. Theodore decides to act on this tip and poke around among these unificationists and eventually determines that the woman is Mahalia Geary, a woman who is an American resident of Ul Quma with a student visa, a grad student. And then it also turns out, though, that this is not a case of breach. Evidence emerges that shows that whoever killed her brought her into Besźel legally. Sort of. I mean, it's not legal to bring a body across the border, but the actual entry into Besźel from Ul Quma was legal through a sort of, there's this building, which is also a gate, and it serves as a legal port of entry.
And it's very cleverly named Copula Hall. It's you could imagine cupula. It's sort of described as maybe shaped in this like that, but copula is going to bring up all sorts of Latinate ideas of joining.
Yeah. Yep. And it's a building that's owned by both cities too, and that's where there is some joint administration, some cooperative administration, and that happens in that building. So Borloo, because this is not breach, but because the murder happened in, I say in quotes, Ul Quma, he is sent to work with Detective Qasim Dot, his counterpoint in Ul Quma, and he's going to continue the investigation there and help out. Dot meets him and greets him very warmly, but then kind of freezes him out of the investigation at first. But then over time, they kind of gradually start working together, and Borloo confesses how he came to learn that Geary was a resident of Ul Quma, which is through breach, and Dot keeps his secret for him, basically. So they gain a little more trust. And I'll let you finish this out.
Yeah, there is another woman who is missing while Borloo is in Ul Quma, Yolanda Rodriguez. And the thing that they have in common is an interest in a third city, which is called Orsini. And Orsini is basically like a child's tale, folklore, something like that. Like, don't misbehave badly or, you'll get whisked off to Orsini, that kind of thing. And you're really not like, you can talk about it, but probably in like as if you're talking to a child. But other than that, you're really not supposed to like bring up talking about Orsini. And Borlu and Dot meet David Bowden, who we have heard about before from Mahalia Giri's thesis advisor, who's an archaeologist who wrote a book who posited that Orsini actually exists, but he now disavows. And we're not totally sure the reason for the disavowing, but we have already seen that political powers are at play.
It is academically and politically a it is considered to be a dead idea or it's not an idea that will allow your career to advance.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's also it gets complicated here because there are Ul Quma and Besźel really do function as separate countries, not even separate cities, but separate countries. But there are all these hints that they have a shared heritage, including I've now read it twice and even really more than twice. There's all these hints that they speak separate languages that are written differently, but there's basically, from what we can tell, they're actually very similar languages. And people are always surprised at how good Borlu's Ul Qumman is, or they even have another name for it, Illiton or something like that. But it reminds me of how Arabic speakers describe the relationship between Hebrew and Arabic, which is that, like, if you know the sort of basic roots, if you know one, you can understand the other. Even though the pronunciation is sometimes different and the lettering is different, that actually the language structurally are very, very similar. So, well, I'm a little disappointed that you got as much information about the premise as you got. I am curious about your journey towards when you sort of really realized, like, oh, I get the premise here.
Yeah.
And what were the moments along the way of that?
It was pretty delicious for me, because I didn't know a ton about the premise. Like, I sort of was like, oh, there's like some like metaphysical thing about the cities. That's about as like close as I got. And his sighting of the older woman early on sent this like shiver of like something illicit through me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, something's going on here.
I remember when I read that for the first time thinking that my image of it was that she was like maybe like on the other side of a wall, right? And like the city's borders were sort of like you could see across a physical
right,
border.
like it was like in a ghetto or something, and maybe you could and like she had passed like across like a fence line and you could suddenly see her for a second, but I think actually she's on the same street.
Yeah, she's right there.
Yeah. And I was like, what's happening? And then I was like, what is this breach stuff? And then it's around chapter 5 where you get your first real, like, here's what's happening. And I just think, I really thought, like, a bunch of my, I don't know if you saw, like, added questions, subtracted questions, like, revised stuff. Because, like, I did want to talk a little bit about the world building, but I think that's what we're doing right now. And I had taken away some of my questions about that because it is so deftly done. At first, you're sort of in this, like, kind of pretty regular whodunit.
Yeah.
But you always
it's like watching
feel
Wallander
like
or something.
Something is off. I don't know if you've ever played the video game Disco Elysium.
No.
You play a cop who is ostensibly has been sent to investigate either a murder or a suicide. There's a dead body that is hanged behind the hotel. But in your unrelentingly fucked upness of the character, you got there and got blacked out drunk. And so your character wakes up from a blackout having no concept of the murder he's supposed to investigate. And it takes place in this kind of seaside French-ish city with really haunting music. And I was like, there is no way that the makers of Disco Elysium have not read The City and the City because it has this same very strange. Well, I think one of the things I love most about this book is that as strange as Besźel and Ul Quma are, the rest of the world is the world that we know.
Yeah.
There's America and England and France and sports and Canada and
Yep.
like
Yep.
it's just straight up the world. And there's this intensely odd little Eastern European metaphysical city that exists. And I love that.
You know, I studied anthropology and history in college, and when I read this, one of the things I immediately thought about I think one of the things that's fascinating is the unseeing. And I actually have a little passage prepped.
Yeah.
So when Borlu is going to go to Ul Quma, and again, it means passing through a gate and then basically going right back where he started physically, except for now he's in Ul Quma. And what that means is he needs to unsee Besźel and he
Yeah.
needs to see Ul Quma. And he spends 2 days getting trained in how to do this. And normally the training takes a lot longer if somebody from Besźel wants to go to Ul Quma. But because he's a cop and because he's been there before, he gets to do the 2 day version. And there's this moment where he's going the training, and I have a reading here, although bear with me a little bit. My notes are not great. But they're training him in how to unsee Besźel and see Ul Quma. And they sat me in what is called an Ul Quma simulator, a booth with screens for the inside walls, on which they projected images and videos of Besźel, with the Bez buildings highlighted and their Ul Quma neighbors minimized with lighting and focused. Over long seconds, again and again, they would reverse the visual stress so that for the same vista, Besźel would recede and Ul Quma shine.
Mhm.
How could you not think of the stories we grew up on, that surely the Ul Qumans grew up on too? Ul Quman men and Bez maid, meeting in the middle of Copula Hall, returning to their homes to realize that they live gross topically next to one another. And one of the things that I thought about when I read this the first time is that, oh, actually, like in our cities, we do a version of this.
Yeah.
If you think about in Los Angeles and Portland right now, there are a number of unsheltered people, unhoused people. And if I'm walking along and I see a house that I think is architecturally interesting, I might stop and take a photo of it. I might stand and admire it for a little bit. But if I come to a homeless encampment, or even maybe more commonly, like I'm at the beach or at a park, and I just happen to notice somebody's got a tent set up over in the corner, usually tucked out of the way, I think I kind of unsee it.
Hmm.
And I think also I will go into neighborhoods from time to time, maybe to recreate. Maybe there's a trailhead there. And I'll park my kind of old beat up truck in that neighborhood, and there'll be people patrolling around like neighborhood security. And I know that I basically have like the equivalent of a guest visa.
Hmm.
Like I can go there, I can park my truck for the time that it takes me to go on my hike. But if I linger, I'm going to talk to those security people, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. If you
And
breach.
if I breach.
Yes.
And it's like I've gotten the day pass, right? It's like
Yeah.
I'm from Besźel and I've gotten a day pass to Ul Quma. And I feel like I also, if you think about, I mean, one of the obvious metaphors is East Germany and West Germany, but also parts of Israel and Palestine,
Hmm.
that you have these places that are right up against each other and these cultures that are intertwined to the point of being the same culture, but maintaining a kind of fictitious boundary. I think that's actually very, very common in our
Yeah.
world. And all he's really doing, I don't see this as I mean, I don't see any evidence, maybe breach, maybe not, but I don't see any evidence of this as a sort of supernatural novel. I think that this is just an extreme version of seeing who is our community and who is not our community and where we belong and where we don't belong and reading cues about what you're supposed to see and what you're not supposed to see that all of us do all the time, just
Hmm.
never in quite such an extreme and formalized way. You know, usually it's a little bit more informal.
Yeah, it's kind of like incredibly extreme nationalism.
Mm.
Like, I mean, I mean, it is nationalism, but like it's both more and less than that. But it's like, it's taking this concept of otherness and like putting the police force behind it in an incredibly, I mean, he's turned up the parameters as far as they can go.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think nationalism is part of it, but then I also think about, okay, so here's another story I heard recently is it's also, I think it's also a story about the unwritten rules we internalize
yeah.
as children about how to
Hmm.
behave in certain different kinds of spaces,
Yeah.
things like code switching. And so I heard a story recently, I can't remember where, I think it was an education podcast or maybe it was a book I read about a adolescent boy or teenage boy with autism. And he had gotten some advice from either a teacher or a parent that whenever you meet a stranger, he needs to overcome his instinct, which is to sort of look away and do side by side play and to look that person in the eye and shake hands and say hello. Like that's how you're supposed to greet people. And if you don't do that, you'll come off as kind of strange.
Yeah.
And I think this was an anecdote about why we need culturally competent educators with mental health training. Um, this boy started doing that in men's bathrooms. And you're not supposed to do that. you know
Right, but like, how
we're
would you
supposed to
know?
how would you know
Yeah.
if you're not somebody who most of us are trained in social cues and most of us
Yeah.
probably were taken into men's bathrooms if you're a man when you're 5 or 6 and you learn, oh, we kind of ignore each other here, or we
Yeah.
elevators are like this too, and that's always
Right. We
strange to me.
unsee the other people.
We unsee the other people, and there's certain situations where we unsee the people other people. In our world we don't do that around a nationalistic identity, or an ethnic identity, although maybe we do around ethnic
I
identities.
think yes.
You know, I think actually we do. And so I don't know. I just think there's so much going on here, and the
Mhm.
book is just swimming with all of these and potentialities, and I think it's not quite so weird as it at first appears.
And I think the way that he does it is so deft because he really situates us like murder mystery. Okay, yeah, there's some like local color. This is interesting. Like the kids, like there's like some drug stuff. It's called Chew, and the kids are a
Yep.
little like spooked. But you're like, it all gets filed away in, oh, this is like interesting fiction. Like, oh,
Yep.
how imaginative. And so he sets us in easy and like
Yep.
gives us a very familiar like kind of set of tropes like, okay, dead female body, like the ostensibly like male detective. Oh, sweet, we get the sidekick. Awesome. Sidekick is like kind of cool and wisecracking and a little naive and is like really stoked to be on the job. And like it just feels really like we know exactly where we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And then he begins to sort of like pull the curtain a little bit by little bit. And so that's I think the thing that I am most impressed with is that the ideas are fantastic and incredibly complex and incredibly nuanced, but they're actually conveyed in a really accessible manner.
Yeah.
Like this is bad. We talked about this before, the William Carlos Williams maxim, no ideas but in things. China Mieville is like, I will do ideas and things. Thank you very much.
Yes. And really damn well too.
God, so good. Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to ask you a question that I asked you for our last book, or maybe 2 books ago, The Long
Mhm.
Goodbye. What do you think the inciting incident is?
I saw this on the rundown and I was like, God. Okay.
And if you
The
want,
ins
I have my Robert McKee book here, which has the definition of inciting incident. If you want,
I
I'll summon
think
that.
I think it is when he gets the tip off. I
That was
think
what I
that
was going to say.
because and again, Mieville does such a nice job with this because he connotes that something is wrong. our narrator, who at this up to this point has been a fairly unflappable, hard-boiled gumshoe, like albeit with like, you're sort of like, oh, cool, we're doing Philip Marlowe in Latvia. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of
I mean, it
like,
feels like Henning Mankell, like Wallander, or
yeah,
like
yeah.
Stieg Larsson, or there's some. I've been reading some great Irish noir writer, Tana
Hmm.
French. It feels like that, and great.
But
You know,
he gets this call from this like informant who is like really brusque with him. And he was like, "Are you being an idiot? Are you being stupid?" And our narrator, as he begins realizing what's going on, actually begins writing shit, shit, shit on his notes. So like we are like, "Oh my God, something big is happening here."
yeah,
And we begin to realize that like that breach comes for anybody. No one is safe from breach. And, and instantly that's when I was like, oh, oh, okay, like East Germany, yeah, Jerusalem, Palestine, like all of this stuff, like instantly, it made me think there's this very harrowing moment in Joan Didion's Salvador when she gets to the airport and she realizes that her passport is being read upside down.
mm,
And it's that it's like the she describes it as the mechanisms of dread in Salvador appear to you as if in a piece of fiction. I think she says something brilliant like that, and you're like, screw you, Joan Didion, you're so good. And she describes the unsettling feeling of watching her passport being scrutinized upside down
and you
and
realize,
realizing that the officer doesn't know, doesn't care, and really all of this is arbitrary. And really it is the whims of the people in power who decide if you die or if you live or if you're simply disappeared. And it was that moment that I was like, oh, I am in.
I actually took the liberty of pulling that very moment because I
Ah,
agree.
marvelous.
I agree with you. So we get the call. He's getting a long distance call, and it's getting hiss and crackles, even though the call could be happening from 100 yards away, right? But
Yeah.
because it's going through the Ul Quma phone lines, like through some international barrier into Besźel, it's kind of hissy and cracky. For those of us who remember what international long distance phone calls were like in the 90s, he summoned that well. And he's gotten a tip about who this person is, and
Mhm.
from this unidentified speaker, and who has an accent that sounds a bit Ulkoman. And so Borlu asks, "How did you find out that she'd been killed?" I heard his hiss of breath. Borlu, if you really mean that, you're stupid and I'm wasting time. I recognized her picture, Borlu. Do you think I'm helping you if I don't think I had to? If I didn't think this was important? How do you think I found out? I saw your fucking poster. He put the phone down. I held my receiver to my ear a while, as if he might return. I saw your poster. When I looked down at my notepad, I had written on it, beside the details he had given me, shit, shit, shit. And it's exactly as you said it. Although what I love about it too is that until that moment, the shit, shit, shit was entirely
Yep.
it was subconscious.
What gets paid attention to in this novel is of the utmost importance.
Yes. Well, and I agree with you again about the inciting incident, but my slight nitpick is then
Yeah.
when he then that what does he do? He goes back to his flat. It's late at night. He calls Corey, the constable, and says, "I want you to run down a lead for me. I want you to look into some of the unification groups."
Mhm.
And this is the moment, this is the point of no return because this is when he accepts the intelligence
Mhm.
from Breach. And let me see if I have the right quote here. The inciting incident. Oh, crap. I don't think I have it. No, I might be able to find it.
While
Um,
you're looking, the my response to that is, we've talked about this concept several times now.
yep.
We're gonna have to call it, like the Josh Brolin moment, the
Yeah,
there ain't
yes.
nothing for it moment. And maybe and I think that, we've talked a lot about noir as like the protagonist is arrayed against very big, very mysterious forces. And the nature of noir is this race against time as the protagonist tries to sort out the mystery before those forces kind of, usher him out of existence. And I think that like one of my questions to you was basically about like was about genre. Is
Yeah.
this noir or is this like some like bigger like because it also could be Kafkaesque. It could be
Yeah.
absurdist. And I don't think it is, and I'm not sure we're meant to land on one particular genre, but there are enough trappings of all of these genres in order for us to be, kind of like bringing up those ideas.
Yeah, it certainly has the trappings of noir. And what was your term that you brought up recently for when the first chapter is kind of a ruse and the genre switches?
Yeah, it's called an act one misdirect.
An
That's
act
the
one
term
misdirect.
that I looked up. Yeah.
Yeah, this has elements of that. It certainly has elements of noir, although I've read some of other China Mieville's other works, and one of my favorite is Embassy Town. And Embassy Town feels a lot like The Left Hand of Darkness or The Dispossessed, which are Ursula Le Guin novels. Um, right now, I would say that I think the noir trappings are trappings. I don't think it's Kafkaesque. I think it's a work of anthropological science fiction. I think
Hmm.
it's a work like The Left Hand of Darkness that's the goal of which is to create a plausible scenario to explore some aspect of our reality, our society, and our culture through exaggeration.
Yeah.
And so in The Left Hand of Darkness, I know you haven't read it, but I think I can give you the premise, which is you have a whole planet of people who are neither male nor female, but for 4 or 5 days a month, they
Yeah.
become one or the other in order to mate. Right. And we're exploring human gender and human sex. Um, it, and, Embassy Town has a version of this. I would say, arguably, Project Hail Mary has some elements of anthropological
Hmm.
science fiction. Do Androids Dream has elements of it, which is basically you exaggerate some aspect of human existence in order to kind of turn the light. And I think that's what this book is doing.
Yeah.
I think it's making us see how we unsee. And I think it's making us realize the hidden boundaries and borders and barriers in our own world that we maintain, perhaps not quite so faithfully as the Bez police force in Breach, but
Hmm.
rather faithfully out of custom because Breach is very, very scary and the law
Hmm.
is very, very scary. But what keeps most people in check most of the time? Habit and conditioning.
Habit. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to share with you when I read that passage about the lights, the Ul Quma architecture being dim in the background and then coming to the forefront, what that really reminded me of was I'll share. I'm sure you've seen things like this. I can remember the first
Mm.
moment one of
Yes.
my teachers shared this with me, right? And do you want to
Yeah.
describe it?
So what I see a sort of like 1920s, like sort of flapper woman who has her face turned mostly away from us. She has like a feather in her hair, and she is what's wearing to me because I understand what's happening is I see that she is wearing sort of a like mink coat, and I haven't yet been able to pick up the other image that I think I'm supposed to see here, but why don't you tell me what the other one is?
Well, the easiest way I think to pick up the other image is look at where would the choker would be around her
Uh-huh.
neck and
Yep.
imagine that as a mouth. And then you see the rest of her sort of breast as a chin, and you see her jawline as the bottom of a nose, and you realize you're looking at an old
Oh,
lady.
now I'm looking at an old woman and it happens. It snaps into, and I see, and now I mostly see the old woman, and now I have to go back and forth between them,
And can you
which
see them
is,
both at the same time?
um, yeah,
With
can I see them
with
both at the same time? Sort of,
with
you
some
know,
difficulty, I would say,
yeah.
right? Like usually you're sort of seeing one or you're seeing the other, I think. Maybe if you
this sets
practice, you could get to the point of seeing both at the same time.
so this sets up my Chris's Craft Corner that I have
Hmm.
for today. Which is John Keats's great negative capability,
Mm,
which is also a term that is not so great because you would think that from that term negative capability that what is being talked about here is like maybe the ability to see the negative of that image. That's not what negative capability is. And it's like it's one of those strange literary devices that both explains and also takes part in its own definition.
sure.
So I've got good old M.H. Abrams' Glossary of Literary Terms. If you don't have this book on your shelf, everybody, it's really, really helpful. It's a great book. And what I love even more about this is that the 2 or 3 paragraphs that are in here to define negative capability are not any more helpful than the single sentence that Keats wrote himself.
Mm,
Like we could have just done this entrance with the poet John Keats said, okay, define a literary quality which Shakespeare possessed so enormously. I mean, negative capability. That is, when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason.
mm. Read that for me one more time.
Okay, so quote, negative capability. That is, when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I think is so cool about this book is that it is very clearly an expression of negative capability. We are constantly in mystery, like of what is going on, how does this work, what the fuck is breach. So we are placed in this position of being in the mystery and not being able to reach after fact and reason. I think every inhabitant of Besź and Ul Quma also possess negative capability because they have to.
Yeah.
If they don't, they get breached. They get disappeared. They get something
Although as we're learning, the breach rules are observed in the breach to some
in the
degree.
breach. Yes.
That everybody breaches from time to time, and that we also learn that breach is tolerant of kind of minor breaches for the most part. In
Yeah.
in theory, if you're in Besźel and a car in Ul Quma backfires and you
Yeah.
start at that sound, that could be a breach. They call it a synaptic breach. But we understand that breach is merciful, and they're generally not going to hold that against you. We also
Yes.
understand that tourists probably breach all the time. That they're in Besźel, they're not supposed to be seeing Ul Quma, but they probably do. And generally, the kind of working rule is that if they can just act like they're not breaching, then everybody will
Then
let them get
everybody's
away
good.
with it. And also,
Yeah.
people also accept that children are going to breach all the
Yeah.
time because they're children and they haven't been conditioned not to. And again, a 6-year-old is probably not going to get hauled away by breach by pointing at something in Ul Quma. A 31-year-old might.
Yeah.
Although there are all these little moments where Borlu notes things in Ul Quma before unseeing them. Like he makes eye contact with people on a subway train at one point.
Yeah.
He directs his taxi driver to go by a street that is nondescript in Besźel, but is a tourist destination in Ul Quma. The taxi driver kind of like raises his eyebrows at him, and Borlu is tempted to say, "Oh, when I get to Ul Quma, I'm going to visit, I forget the temple or whatever
Yeah.
the architecture thing is that they have just driven by, but they have not driven by." And so we're starting to learn that everybody breaches a little bit too.
Breach can be merciful, but it's also mercurial. And
Right.
that is I mean, like that's the nature of any police state, right? Is that like it is not predictable when the
Yeah.
Stasi
They
show up at
right.
your door.
They are often merciful, but there's no
Yeah.
guarantee that they will be merciful. It is like the upside down passport. And I think that sets up what I think maybe should be the final question, which is
Sure.
what mystery is going to be solved in the second half of this book?
One way I will stall while my brain thinks about this. I don't know if you caught this, but if you want to visit either of these cities from away, you have to take a 2 week course and then pass
Yep.
an exam.
Yep.
It's very much a David Foster Wallace, like it's a
Well,
Wallaceanian
and that's
moment.
earlier when I was describing Borlu gets like the crash course
Right.
version
Yeah,
of
no,
that,
he gets when I read that section, I
yeah.
really wanted him to like sit up in a chair and go, "Whoa, I know, I see Il Coleman," instead of "I
Well,
know Kung Fu."
yeah, I know
Um,
what you mean, but yeah. But I think part of it is that Borlu is exceptionally intelligent. He's also been there
right.
before too.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think this is like a little bit of a joke. The Okomans keep complimenting him on how good his Ilaton is,
Yeah.
and I think the joke there is that the languages are kind of the same.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but um,
There's
it
all
would
these hilarious defensivenesses.
yeah
Like, if you looked at the Beige alphabet, at first you would think it's Cyrillic, but then
yeah
like
yeah
everybody, Edvard from Beige would like, would disagree with you. And then like the Ilkomen script is like kind of the
sort of
Sanskrity right
Turkic,
to
yeah.
left,
Yeah,
Turkic, that kind of thing.
But since they kind of like modernized, they now write in Roman characters, and
Yeah.
they're kind of more aligned with the Soviet bloc. Although there's some interesting role reversals because they've also had an economic boom
Yeah,
recently.
things are
Kind of,
nicer. Even even the wildlife is sort of
yeah,
nicer. Like
yeah,
there are like the wolves, the Ilkomen wolves are sort of like much their pelts are much finer than the kind of mangy beige like curs that you see
yeah,
running around. There's
yeah.
all sorts of wonderful impossible jokes.
Right,
Borlu talks about throwing lizards across Ilkomen streets and then positing that it was the metaphysical transit through another
right,
country that killed them. And then there's some little like throwaway at the end, like, and not the abuse of childlike hands. And,
right. This is a
it's,
game he played with fellow kids when they.
yeah.
Uh,
Okay. The mystery in the second half of the book. Oh, gosh, I've got a track record to maintain. I perfectly predicted the second half of Our Country Friends.
yeah.
Um, but I so far have
But
been
you'll note I didn't ask you what's going to happen, right? I asked a
yes, right.
slightly
What is
different
the
question.
mystery that will be solved? Um, I mean, we know that it involves the two cities and then the third city, or city.
I
You
mean,
know,
this gets at your question about genre, I think, too.
yeah.
You
And
know,
I think, I agree with you that it's not noir. I think that the mechanisms of noir are perfect to get us in. It helps us get in. We need something that arrays our protagonists against massive unseen forces. So that's, we've been doing that with noir so far. I think the mystery that will be solved is what is the nature of breach.
hmm,
But that's what I want to know.
yeah.
And like any good mystery writer, this is a simple one. I won't take you on a long rambling odyssey about ruptured ducks.
Okay.
So uh, the two the two cities are in fact an actual expression of a real thing that happens in our world, and it has a name. Is that name conurbation? Conurbation, a megalopolis, a megacity, or D, a ring-shaped inhabitation place?
Give me the spelling of the first one again.
Conurbation.
Hmm. Well, I don't think it's D. Um, and I am familiar with the definitions of megalopolis and megacity, which I believe are synonyms. Um,
there is a slight difference between them. They are distinct in terms of
Right. Maybe a megalopolis is multiple cities, and a mega city would be like Cairo or Mexico City, which is just like a big bleeping city. Um, Either way, I don't think either of them. I mean, megalopolis, like, okay, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. are part of a megalopolis.
mhm.
New York, Newark, Jersey City into Philadelphia are part of a megalopolis, but they're not, their borders don't. Oh, you leave New York and you go to
Yes.
Jersey City. You don't cross, the sidewalk and suddenly walk through Jersey City briefly and then have to ignore the
Yeah,
Jersey City people.
exactly.
So I'm going to go with a conurbation.
Conurbation. No, no,
Con-
no L in there. But
Conurbation.
you are correct. A conurbation is a region comprising a number of metropolises, cities, large towns, and other urban areas which, through population growth and expansion, have merged to form one continuous urban or developed area, but those cities retain their centers.
Hmm.
And the defining feature of a conurbation is that it is a shared area of work.
Hmm.
So, like, you
Oh,
might,
Luxembourg City.
yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. There's a, the
Yeah.
best example that I've found so far is called Midlandton.
No, I mean Chicago's kind of like that too because you've got
Mhm.
people commuting from Indiana and Wisconsin into Chicago every day. Um,
And so it said a conurbation should be contrasted with a megalopolis. In a megalopolis, the urban areas are close but not physically contiguous, and so those labor markets have not merged. And then a mega city is hierarchical with an indisputable dominant urban core.
right.
So like I don't
Chicago,
know. Chicago, yeah,
Los Angeles,
I was gonna be like
Mexico City,
Chicago.
Cairo, Tokyo,
I was
London.
looking is there a way that we can get, I'm sure Coruscant has like one dominant city in the middle of it,
Ah,
but I can't quite remember its name. It's
I don't.
probably like Coruscant City.
I don't know the demarcations of Coruscant. Was there any references to Coruscant in the original trilogy, or was that created for the second trilogy, the prequel trilogy? Or was it created in the novels? I bet it was created in the novelizations between after the original. Because I sort of recall, and I did read those Timothy Zahn
Hmm.
novels, and I think
Yep.
Coruscant was the capital of the New Republic then.
I wonder. I don't know. I will, yeah, that'll be a good explanation for later. But you got it.
I got it.
Congratulations.
All
Yeah.
right. So, in the early 1950s, the Soviet Union began sealing off the borders of its various satellite states,
Hmm.
making it hard for scientists and other people who objected to the increasingly authoritative state to exit to the West. This was the Iron Curtain.
Totally.
And I'm not talking about the actual Soviet Union, but I'm talking about the states that it maintained a sphere of influence over.
Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia.
Correct? Poland,
Yes.
East Germany,
I was just
Kazakhstan.
I was just having a brutal moment of being like, I know we lost Yugoslavia, but then I was like, wait, yeah, I was having a Besźel and Ul Quma moment.
Yeah, that one was particular. Did you notice the reference to Tito from Yugoslavia and also
Yeah.
Ataturk?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to say that like Turkey and Yugoslavia were kind of weird cases. I don't know that they were quite as under the same Soviet
Hmm.
sphere as Turkey might have been American allies during the Cold War. They
Yes,
were,
they were. Yeah. Yeah,
because we
they
put
were a
missiles there, which is
they
right.
were a crucial containment state. Yeah.
So at any rate, they're sealing in the 1950s. They're sealing it off, but for years there was an obvious exception, a place for nearly 8 years. It was a loophole where people could get out basically and get to the West. So what was the loophole? Was the loophole A, West Berlin, which could easily be accessed by the subway from East Berlin? B, Sarajevo, which was controlled by Tito's Yugoslavian government, except the northwest quarter of the city, which was Département of France? Or C, Bonaire, a Dutch island in the Caribbean, which was within easy swimming distance of Cuba at low tide and wading distance during a spring tide.
I'm gonna go with Sarajevo.
What I did was make this one too easy. It is, in fact, A, West Berlin.
Oh my God, really?
They didn't build the Berlin Wall until 1961.
Oh,
And the
you said
reason
50s. Oh, oh, God damn it.
there
Oh, I
was
forgot that
there
part.
were eight
You said for
years,
8 years. Oh,
and
that's
that's why
okay.
they built the wall, is because all the like scientists and leading intellectuals were going with their like internal visa to East
Uh-huh.
Berlin, and then just taking the
Uh,
subway, and then boarding, and then they're
yep.
in the West, and then they can
Yep.
catch a plane to London or wherever they want to go.
hmm
Yeah, so that's why they built it. But yeah,
There's
I
there's a great joke in our friends and neighbors where some sort of like communist apparatchiks are joking about the leader of East Europe, whose name I can't remember, but the sun rises one morning and is basically like, "Fuck off," like East German communist leader, and the
oh
East
yeah.
German is like, why are you so mad at me? The son just says, because I'm in the West now. And they're sort of,
The
it's
sun,
great.
the SON or the S
Yeah, no,
or
yes,
the
yes. No,
SUN.
the SUN. The sun
Right.
rises and is
Ah,
in the West and has
I see.
escaped East Germany. And in like,
Oh.
the like sort of what we were talking about the Stasi earlier, they're
Mm,
caught by one of the their joke is overheard by their
mm,
boss. And there's
mm.
this wonderful moment of like them wondering if they're in like really big trouble.
Yeah.
And he laughs with them instead. But
Yeah.
you're never
Yeah.
at ease.
Did you see the movie? It was like a Disney film in the 80s, Night Crossing.
No.
I don't know if it was literally Disney, but it was a children's movie, but about a very adult topic. It was kind of like kind of have a similar feel to Swiss Family Robinson, but it was about a family that made a hot air balloon to escape from East Berlin to West Berlin. And I think it
That's
was based on a
amazing.
true story too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was my first exposure to that political reality. And
Yeah.
I remember watching White Knights around the same time,
hmm
which also that was
Wait,
different
Knights?
though, because
Harrison Ford? Strange
no,
Harrison Ford movie? What am I
no.
thinking of?
Uh, what are you thinking of?
Hmm.
Uh,
Maybe it's a strange Harrison Ford.
Awakenings.
No, I'll look it up.
He
It's a
is
weird
he is in
one.
Awakenings. Um, White Knights was Baryshnikov and Gregory Hines.
Oh, right, of
Baryshnikov
course.
is a defector who then is traveling somewhere and his plane crashes in the Soviet Union. So he's defected, but then he is forced to go back to the Soviet
hmm
Union. And then Gregory Hines is like the American sort of former Black Panther communist sympathizer dancer
Oh
who
my God.
forms an unlikely friendship with him. And then and some of the most amazing dancing you'll ever see in
Of
your life.
course. Yeah.
Just like the kind of greatest American vernacular dancer and like the greatest Russian ballet dancer. Just like, yeah, and very 80s. Like at one point they danced to Lou Reed, I mean, it's just
Oh,
like
that's incredible.
great, like 80s Cold War paranoia. It's a great movie. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
that sounds
this
rad.
book definitely reminds me, it has a similar feel to
We
White
could do
Knights.
a really fun East Germany, West Germany set of movies that would
Yeah.
definitely
Or,
culminate in
or just
your
Cold
friends and
War.
neighbors.
I haven't seen that. Yeah. I haven't.
What?
I've seen what's the one with the Gedek, Martina Gedek.
That's your friends and neighbors. That's
Oh,
the
is it? Oh yeah.
yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking of something else. That's a great movie.
Oh,
There's all
yeah, it's astonishing.
there's a great episode of the BBC Wallander called The Dogs of Riga, which actually has a lot in common with this book. Because Wallander is a Swedish detective who goes to Latvia to investigate a kind of a similar case, like interagency cooperation. But so everybody,
what's up next?
What's up next is the second half of this book, and
thank God.
And we'll see if Chris Bagg's prediction about what mystery we're going to solve is in fact correct.
Well, Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are two unseen commissars. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and
Justin Reich.
But if you want to become our third patron, search for us on Patreon or just check the show notes for a link.
And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessiedukes.com. Or you can enroll as a patron at the You Really, Really Like Us tier, which includes some one-on-one editorial time with one of us or the other, or if you pay enough, both. See you next time, everybody.
Thanks for listening.